After you have heard that gospel familiar to us all, you have heard it said, but I tell you, you have been asked to do this, but I'm going to ask you to go further. You would shake your head and really you would say, that is unrealistic. Or you might smile and give it lip service, but you would say, nobody can do that. Nobody can really turn the other cheek. Nobody can either look beyond that little hurt and go immediately to forgiveness. It just is so unrealistic. It just seems as though no one can do it. And so that's the attitude of many Christians, many of us even. How can you possibly live this kind of gospel? And so what happens to some of us anyway, we abandon it. We say, well, that's what God holds out as the ideal, but I'm not the ideal. That's what God would say to those who are on a different level of spirituality. I'm not there. So I kind of excuse myself by saying it is too difficult, too unrealistic. After all, if I did those things in our world, I'd be opening myself up to a lot of harm and hurt. Very vulnerable, as a matter of fact. I couldn't exist. Try living in some parts of our country or city, and you would find soon that this is an untenable way to live without retaliation, with a universal sense of love. So I quickly kind of back away from it, or I rob it of its real power. But really, in fact, I think it's a different thing we have to do, a different approach we have to take, a different aspect we have to look at, new eyes we have to see it. What it's really saying to you and me is, first of all, you don't move from no retaliation at all, from having been someone who retaliates all the time. You don't move quickly into loving everybody when you haven't really loved even those near you. There's a gradualness about this that we really have to respect and understand. You move into this attitude, but the secret is that you have to have the value. You have to begin to take the value and root it in your heart, to say, this is how I want to be. I want to be someone who is not quick to retaliate, so quick with the harsh remark, with the rash judgment. I want to be that person who doesn't have to always respond in a negative way when someone has said something negative to me. I don't want to be someone who always has to get even. I want to be someone different. That value has to be first rooted in my heart before it'll ever take root in my hands, my life. It really has to take root. And that's the gradualness of this. And that's the real power of this. It says, take the virtue, take the teaching, and put it in your heart. Let it grow there, water it, nurture it, tend to it. And then it will give expression. You don't move away right immediately to expression. If you've ever dealt with addictions, you know that's true. Sometimes it will take someone who's dealing with an addiction several tries at rehabilitation at a chemical dependency place or at some place that changes a behavior before it really takes root. Because you see, it first has to take root. I have to imagine myself without that addiction before I'll ever live without it. I have to understand the power of the virtue of being sober in this way, of not living with that behavior before I'll ever move away from that kind of attitude. So I think the first part of this is not to dismiss it as impossible, but to see it happens when I take the virtue and plant it in my heart and begin to live it in slow, gradual ways. I begin to implement it in decent, honest ways. I may not do it perfectly, but I will begin to do it. There was a reminder to me. I was reading over one of the commentaries. John Shea is a writer in our church, and he was talking about this, and he talked about it in almost a whimsical way, and I was reminded at our staff meeting when someone else quoted it from John Shea. Shea is looking at this, and he says there was a snake who heard the teaching of an itinerant preacher, and the preacher was going by and giving this word of Jesus that we should not retaliate, that we should have universal love. So the snake decided he would no longer bite anyone. And when the children began to find out about it, that he would not bite them, they began to beat him with a stick. They began to throw him against the wall. They began to step on him, almost dying. The itinerant preacher comes by the snake to see him. It says, "How are you doing?" And the snake says, "Well, I'm not doing real well." And he said to the preacher, "But I'm trying," hoping that the preacher would say, "Good for you." And the preacher said, "I told you not to bite. I didn't tell you that you couldn't hiss." What does that mean to us? It means we gradually, okay, I'm not going to bite, I'm not going to retaliate, but I still may live with that threat of retaliation. I'll grow into it. I'll move toward it, but I'm moving toward it, not away from it. I'll move into it, not back away from it. That's the first thing. It is a gradual process of taking what's rooted in my heart and putting it into my life. But then the second thing. This gospel demands a change in attitude. It is a radical change in the way I look at my society or I look at other people. I don't adopt the values of a society if I'm a Christian. I have to stand in opposition to some of the values, some of the actions of our society. I have to be something more, at least by this gospel. And so it reminded me of a story of a woman who was a teacher. She was teaching the middle school children, junior high, 6th to 8th graders. They were going to do a food drive, having just done a lesson on the needs of people who have less. They were going to do something more. So she encouraged them to bring in things that the people would not be able to buy, purchase, or have for themselves. She was walking by this large collection of canned goods and fresh produce and was really admiring that they had done it. They had gone out of their way. There were a lot of high-end things here, not the usual. Oh, there was the ordinary things necessary, the mac and cheese, the peanut butters, the tomato soups. All those were there, but then she looked a little closer. There was some risotto there. There was some rice pilaf there. There was some artichokes in olive oil, and there was some special crackers, now seasoned with a little rosemary on them. There were some cheeses offered that were different than the usual cheddar cheese or Velveeta cheese. She was proud for her children. And then another staff member walked by, and she scoffed and looked at the teacher and said, "What are those people going to do with this? They don't even know what an artichoke is for." And she kept walking by. And the teacher said, "Those people," because she was one of those people just 18 months earlier. Raising 2 children, her husband had left her, and so she found herself needing help from other people. Until she got this permanent job, she was only doing temporary, fill-in, substitute teaching, not enough to make the ends meet. So she found herself being one of those people. She would have to go to the food pantry. She said later to others that it took her about 4 times. She drove by it several days in a row because she had to have the courage to go in. It was too humiliating, too embarrassing to say she needed the food, but the cupboards were getting thin, the food not adequate for her children. For the sake of her children, she went in. Those people. And she went in there, and when you've gone into one of those places, you have to fill out usually reams of paper. What's your name? What's your social security number? Why do you need the food? What have you done with your other food? How much money do you make? Who's going to get the food? What are their names? How old are they? How long have you lived in this place? So much private information to so many strangers. My life poured out, she would say, to others, those people. And so finally she did get the food, and she was grateful. She knew it was an up and down thing at most food pantries. Some days it's good fare, good food, unusual things. So one time even being able to bring home a warm roasted chicken that someone had dropped off, and even some rosemary potatoes, unique for them to have that night. Other times it was dented cans and somewhat spoiled produce. But beggars couldn't be choosers, those people. And then she was worried about what her children would think. How would they react? Be embarrassed? Tell her, no, don't bring that home? No, they just pitched in, recognized it was a need they had. and they put it away in the cupboard. Those people. Yes, those people, she thought. So as her teacher walked by and had mumbled, "What are they going to do with artichokes?" she simply smiled at the woman and says, "I know what to do with artichokes." Those people. It's a change in attitude, isn't it? It's a change when I move from those people to seeing a universal way to love. Those people, it's easy to retaliate against another when they have no name and they don't have any standing. It's a change in attitude. From God's daughter and son to those people is a great gulf. But I'm called to make the journey from those people to seeing another as a brother and sister. So I need not to dismiss this as a difficult gospel, but rather see it as a gradual move. A move from a biting to a hissing, perhaps. A moving to be more realistic and putting a virtue in my heart. A moving away from those people to seeing a brother and sister in Christ.